Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist and an author of a book, The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. In his book, he used moral foundation theory in order to analyze the battle between liberals and conservatives. With that said, in this video, moral foundation theory is used to analyze the political visions of Vivek Ramaswamy. He is a candidate for the 2024 presidential election.
Note:
In this video, we use some of the terminology of the zeptiform theory. Zeptiform is a three-dimensional structure. By using zeptiform, we can integrate personality theory, physics, music theory, brain science, politics, and so on. The usage of zeptiform, as well as the meaning of the word zeptiform, is discussed in the Zeptiform Theory video series.
Part 1, Section 1, Moral Foundations Theory.
According to moral foundations theory, there are 6 foundational aspects of morality. These are care, fairness, authority, loyalty, sanctity, and liberty. The first aspect, which is care, is the opposite of harm. By protecting and cherishing weak individuals, harm can be eliminated. Fairness is the opposite of cheating. That is, for example, by punishing unjust people, fairness, or justice, can be served. In the zeptiform theory, the term fairness is replaced by justice. Authority is the opposite of subversion. Loyalty is the opposite of betrayal. Sanctity is the opposite of degradation. Liberty is considered to be the opposite of oppression. But, in the zeptiform theory, liberty is considered to be the opposite of restriction. The reason will be discussed later. These 6 moral foundations will be discussed with regard to political parties.
Care and justice.
Justice is related to giving punishment to unjust people. It is based on the responsibility of each individual, which brings about independence. On the other hand, care is related to protecting victims from harm. It is the consideration of relationship, or intimacy, which brings about interdependence. As we can see, justice brings about independence, and care brings about interdependence. According to Carol Gilligan and many other psychologists, women tend to focus on care, and men tend to focus on justice. Justice, or fairness, is related to the equality of opportunity, while care is related to the equality of outcome. The equality of opportunity brings about the proportionality of outcome among people. That is, when we work harder, we have a right to get more, in proportion to what we contribute. It can be seen as the justness between effort and reward. On the other hand, care is related to protecting victims from harm, and it brings about the equality of outcome among people. According to Jonathan Haidt, the proportionality of justice does not exclude the equality of outcome. That is, under the rule of proportionality. When the contributions among people are the same, it creates the equality of outcome. But, because the contributions among people are not usually the same, it tends to create the inequality of outcome. Consequently, it creates hierarchical order. Then, from the perspective of care, it is considered to be evil, the source of oppression and harm. On the other hand, from the perspective of justice, the equality of outcome tends to be seen as the cause of degradation, creating lazy people, free riders, or cheaters. As we can see, the value system of justice and that of care tend to fight each other. Conservatives tend to value justice, and liberals tend to value care. Therefore, they tend to fight each other. In this context, liberal social justice warriors are social care warriors. As already discussed, men tend to value justice, and women tend to value care. Related to this, according to research by Jonathan Haidt, when conservatives and liberals are compared, we can see that there are more men than women in conservatives, and there are more women than men in liberals. This graph is created based on the older version of moral foundations theory. In the older version of the theory, fairness, which is also called justice, was considered to be the equality of outcome, not the equality of opportunity. In this case, liberals are high on fairness, as illustrated in this figure. The left side represents liberals, and right side represents conservatives. However, Jonathan Haidt changed the meaning of fairness from equality to proportionality. The reason can be explained in the following way. Suppose you work harder than other people, contributing more to society. However, you and other people, including lazy people, can get the same amount of money. Then, do you think that is fair? Many people think that. That is not fair. Therefore, the meaning of fairness needs to be changed from equality to proportionality. In this figure, the meaning of fairness is changed from the equality of outcome to the equality of opportunity, which brings about the proportionality of outcome. That is the core definition of justice. Jonathan Haidt described the definition of justice in the following way.
So what is justice?
According to him, justice is related to the ratio between inputs and outcomes.
What's the ratio of my inputs? How much work am I doing? And then what am I getting out of it? That's the ratio. So we keep track of each other's ratios. And equality is a very important kind of fairness. Equality is a special case. If our inputs are all equal, well then of course, our outcomes should be equal. So if the bottom line holds, then of course the top line holds, okay? But what about the case where you're doing more work than Mary, and Mary's doing more work than Bob, but yet your outcomes are all the same? This is not fair, not justice. Now, I've read a lot of definitions of social justice. It's very hard to understand exactly what the definition of social justice is, but I think there are two parts to it. So social justice activists are very focused on disparate treatment of individuals, and that is a subtype of justice. That is good. Everybody should agree that that is a thing to focus on. If people are treated differently because they are black or gay or female, that is wrong. That is an outrage. That should stop. Somebody should stop it. But there's another part of social justice. Social justice, as I experience it, as I hear it, as I read about it, it is not mostly about disparate treatment. It is mostly about disparate outcomes. And when social justice is focused on achieving equal outcomes for all groups, then it's no longer a subset of justice. Part of it is justice, part of it is outside of justice. And if you want to understand why, let me work through an example. So in 2006, under George W. Bush, the Department of Education began prosecuting Title IX offenses. And so one thing that they noticed is that in public schools around the country, boys are disciplined, expelled, and suspended more often than girls. And the ratios are gigantic. I mean, it's often 10 to 1 or more. And so the Bush administration thought, this is unfair. This is a violation of Title IX.
Title IX prohibits gender discrimination.
You can't be discriminated against against boys in this way. And so they told schools that they must eliminate gender disparities in punishment. And so what did schools do? Well, what are they going to do? They have to now crack down on the girls. If a girl does anything wrong, because girls are so much better behaved than boys, so if a girl does anything wrong, we have to suspend her. And if a boy does anything that isn't violent, we have to look the other way, because we've got to narrow that gap. So think about that. We know that boys have many more behavior problems than girls. They have many more externalizing disorders. They commit more violent crimes. They don't get their grades aren't as good. We know that boys' violation rate is way, way above the girls. And so if the goal is to make the suspension rates the same, is that fair? Is that justice? Raise your hand if you think that is a fair or just goal. Raise your hand high. Okay, nobody. Because that is an abomination of justice. Now, thank God this didn't happen. I made up the whole story, okay? That did not happen. But what did happen is this. In 2014, the Obama administration, Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, noticed that punishment rates are very disparate by race. This is true. And so the Civil Rights Act prohibits such discrimination, and they tell schools that they must eliminate their disparities. They send one of their infamous Dear Colleague letters warning schools, you better even the rates out or we're coming after you. And so the Minneapolis Public Schools, the administrator, the head of the public schools, comes up with a new plan that's going to make it much more difficult to suspend children of color. And of course, they're going to try to crack down on the white and Asian kids because they got to get those rates equal. So what do you think? We know that the black and Latino violation rate is higher, not just from the corresponding crime rates outside of school, but just from the fact that boys raised without marriage, boys raised with men cycling through the home, have many more behavior problems. So we know that the rates are different. And if the goal is to equalize the rates of punishment, is that fair? Raise your hand if you think that would be fair. So this is an abomination from the point of view of fairness or justice. to do that. And that's why I say that when social justice, as I see it, as we practice in this country, when social justice demands equal treatment, it is justice, it is right, it is good. And when it demands equal outcomes without concern for inputs or differences, it is unjust. And the only way to achieve those equal outcomes is through injustice. If it would simply do this, then most of the conflicts with truth would go away and we wouldn't need the schism. But that would involve committing blasphemy, so don't hold your breath.
Committing blasphemy will be discussed later.
Justice, authority, and loyalty.
Justice requires authority and loyalty in the following way. In order to bring justice, unjust people need to be punished. Then, in order to punish unjust people, authority is required. When there is no justice or no punishment, people tend to betray, and betrayal is the opposite of loyalty. As we can see, authority and loyalty can be seen as subsets of justice. Justice is related to proportionality, as already discussed. Conservatives tend to value proportionality more than liberals do. Furthermore, libertarians tend to value proportionality more than conservatives do. However, unlike conservatives, libertarians do not value authority and loyalty. Justice for libertarians is utilitarianism, and that is related to meritocracy. In this context, authority and loyalty cannot be seen as subsets of justice. That will be discussed later.
Sanctity.
Sanctity is one of the 6 moral foundations. According to Jonathan Haidt, liberals tend to be against sanctity. He said,
For liberals, sanctity is religious mumbo-jumbo, whose only function is to suppress female sexuality and justify homophobia.
However, liberals tend to sanctify Mother Nature. That is, conservatives and liberals tend to sanctify different aspects of reality. Sanctity for conservatives is based on justice, such as punishing infidelities. On the other hand, sanctity for liberals is based on care, such as the care for nature or environment, including animals. The New Age movement is related to the sanctity of liberals, and that is different from that of conservatives. It is represented by the following phrase:
I am spiritual, but not religious.
In this context, religion represents conventional rules, in which authority and loyalty are valued. On the other hand, spirituality, in this context, is based on care, as well as the freedom of each individual. The freedom of each individual is called lifestyle liberty or personal liberty. That will be discussed later. According to Jonathan Haidt, sanctity is related to a sense of disgust. That is, sanctity is the purification of disgusting things. He said,
If we had no sense of disgust, I believe we would also have no sense of the sacred.
For example, conservatives tend to feel a sense of disgust at gay marriage as well as abortion. On the other hand, liberals tend to feel a sense of sadness and pain at the destruction of Mother Nature. The sense of disgust and that of sadness and pain tend to be connected to anger, and it tends to cause political wars. According to Jonathan Haidt, libertarians tend not to experience the feeling of disgust. They tend to dissociate from negative feelings in order to be rational. Therefore, they do not value sanctity. Furthermore, as discussed previously, they do not value authority and loyalty. Therefore, Haidt said,
Libertarians have little use for them, which is why they tend to support liberal positions on social issues, such as gay marriage, drug use, and laws to protect the American flag.
Related to this, many libertarians are atheists.
Liberty.
In terms of politics, there are 2 different aspects of liberty: lifestyle liberty and economic liberty. The former, which is lifestyle liberty, is also called personal liberty. In this figure, we can see the correlation between liberty and political parties. For example, liberals tend to support abortion, and it is related to lifestyle liberty, which is called pro-choice. However, as illustrated in Figure B, liberals do not support economic liberty. The reason can be seen in the following way. If we support economic liberty, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Liberals do not want this kind of situation. It is related to care, protecting weak individuals from harm. Conservatives tend to restrict lifestyle liberty. For example, they tend to sacrifice their own personal liberty for their family and nation. Related to this, in terms of care for family, conservatives tend to dominate liberals. Figure A is care for generic other, and figure B is care for family. As illustrated in figure A, liberals tend to value the ethic of care. However, as illustrated in figure B, in terms of care for family, conservatives dominate liberals. That is related to the traditional role of women. As discussed, conservatives tend to restrict lifestyle liberty, but they tend to favor economic liberty. This is related to justice. That is, when we contribute more, we have a right to get more. As already discussed, justice is related to proportionality. On the other hand, equality-seeking liberals tend to devalue this type of justice, not supporting economic liberty. It tends to invalidate the responsibility of each individual, allowing free riders or cheaters. Conservatives don't like it. Therefore, there is a conflict between conservatives and liberals. It can be seen as the conflict between justice and care.
Contradiction.
Liberals tend to think that any authority is masculine and evil. It is related to lifestyle liberty. However, it tends to create a contradiction in the following way. As we have seen, liberals want to restrict economic liberty in order to protect the weak. But, in order to restrict economic liberty, the government needs to have authority. As we can see, there is an inconsistency in the ideology of liberals. Liberty brings about the equality of opportunity. But, as we have seen, it tends to cause the inequality of outcome. Therefore, liberals want to restrict economic liberty. According to Jonathan Haidt, in some cases, this tendency tends to create a contradiction. In order to describe this problem, he used a metaphor of bees in a hive.
It's as though liberals are trying to help a subset of bees, which really does need help, even if doing so damages the hive. Such reforms,
which are the restriction of economic liberty,
may lower the overall welfare of a society, and sometimes they even hurt the very victims liberals were trying to help.
According to Jonathan Haidt, the opposite of liberty is oppression. But, in the zeptoform theory, the opposite of liberty is considered to be restriction. The reason can be explained in the following way. Liberty eliminates restrictions, including the restriction of economic liberty. Then, the rich get richer, and the poor get poorer. Consequently, it tends to cause the oppression of the weak. As we can see, in some cases, liberty tends to cause oppression. Because of this, oppression cannot be considered to be the opposite of liberty. Oppression is more related to the opposite of care. That is, oppression tends to cause harm, and it is the opposite of care. However, as we have seen, in some cases, prioritizing care over liberty tends to cause contradictions.
Note.
The term liberal is related to liberty, but, as we have seen, liberals tend to be against economic liberty. Also, they tend to be against freedom of speech in order to protect the weak. As we can see, liberals are not true liberals. They are against freedom of speech as well as economic liberty. Therefore, Jonathan Haidt calls them illiberals. Then, the people, who value freedom of speech, began to describe themselves as classical liberals. Furthermore, an extreme form of classical liberalism is called libertarianism. Libertarians tend to value both lifestyle liberty and economic liberty. In terms of lifestyle liberty, libertarians are similar to liberals. However, liberals do not totally support lifestyle liberty or personal liberty. For example, they do not support the freedom of speech of each individual person. In terms of economic liberty, libertarians are similar to conservatives. However, conservatives do not totally support economic liberty. It can be seen as the battle between the ethnocentric nationalism of conservatives versus the world-centric globalism of libertarians. There is also a conflict between liberals and libertarians. It is related to the conflict between the industrialism of libertarians and the environmentalism of liberals. It can be seen as the conflict between liberty for economics and care for nature. Also, it is related to the conflict between the meritocracy of libertarians and the affirmative action of liberals. It can be seen as the conflict between liberty for elites and care for the weak. As discussed, in terms of economic liberty, there is a battle between liberals and libertarians. However, there is a strange combination between these two groups. That is called woke capitalism. Woke capitalism will be discussed later from the perspective of Vivek Ramaswamy. As we can see in this figure, Liberalism is related to lifestyle liberty and economic restriction. On the other hand, conservatism is related to economic liberty and lifestyle restriction. Then, lifestyle liberty and economic liberty can be integrated by libertarianism. The opposite of libertarianism can be seen as totalitarianism, which brings about the restriction of freedom. Totalitarianism is regarded as the most extreme and complete form of authoritarianism. As we have seen, care and justice are two major aspects of morality. Liberals tend to value care, and conservatives tend to value justice. Then, the different consequences of morality can be experienced as liberty versus restriction, and libertarians tend to value liberty. In the Zeptiform theory, liberty alone is not considered to be morality. For example, I will do what I want to do is not morality, but when liberty is integrated with justice or care, it becomes morality. For example, I will take care of oppressed people in order to give them liberty is morality. The integration of justice, care, and liberty is one of the main topics of the Zeptiform theory.
Part 1, Section 2, Systemizing versus Empathizing.
Men tend to be good at systemizing, and women tend to be good at empathizing. With that said, according to research by Jonathan Haidt, libertarians are the highest on systemizing and the lowest on empathizing. Related to this, among libertarians, there are more men than women. Liberals are the lowest on systemizing and the highest on empathizing. Related to this, among liberals, there are more women than men. Conservatives are in the middle on both systemizing and empathizing. When systemizing and economic liberty are compared, we can see the following correlation. The people who tend to be good at systemizing tend to value economic liberty. The work of systemizing requires intellectuality. Related to this, according to the research by Jonathan Haidt, libertarians are the highest in IQ, and conservatives are the second. In the STEM field, which will be discussed later, you can see many libertarians. They are good at systemizing.
The gender equality paradox in the STEM field.
The Nordic countries are egalitarian countries. Therefore, in these countries, there is the equality of opportunity for men and women. Then, liberal social scientists predicted the following. When the equality of opportunity in society increases, the difference between men and women decreases. However, in the STEM field, exactly the opposite thing happened. The difference between men and women increased. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In this figure, the vertical axis represents the degree of gender equality for opportunities. As we can see, Nordic countries are high on gender equality for opportunities. The horizontal axis represents the percentage of women among STEM graduates. As we can see in this figure, as the degree of gender equality for opportunity increases, the number of women in the STEM field decreases. As illustrated in blue, there is no country which is high in both gender equality and female STEM graduates. The same result has been replicated by many scientists. Therefore, this finding is considered to be one of the most reliable findings in social science. The London Times, for example, stated that
it is now one of the best established findings in psychology.
The reason for the increase in difference can be explained in the following way. In egalitarian countries, people can choose what they want to choose. The freedom of choice increases. Therefore, if men and women are interested in different things, the difference between men and women will be amplified. Women tend to be interested in people, and men tend to be interested in things. This is the difference between empathizing and systemizing. Because of this difference, men tend to choose the STEM field, and women do not. However, radical liberals do not want to accept this kind of objective fact, because they want to achieve the equality of outcome. Consequently, there is the battle between political correctness versus scientific correctness, or subjective opinion versus objective fact.
So here's a graph. This is very recent data.
This graph is the percentage of female employees in the workforce of tech companies.
So here's some of the top Silicon Valley companies. And as you see in green, in the non-tech jobs, women are about 50% of the workforce in Silicon Valley. But in the tech jobs, it's below 20%, averaging around 15, 17%. So look at that graph and tell me, do you see evidence in that graph of institutional or systemic sexism? Raise your hand if you see evidence of institutional or systemic sexism. Please raise your hand high right now. Anyone? What are you? You must be a bunch of right-wing, libertarian. I can't believe it. I can't believe it because normally, I've shown this at a few schools, and a lot of hands go up. I mean, this is the definition of institutional or systemic sexism, typically, a gender disparity. Okay, so my next demonstration is going to flub because, all right, here it is. So this is the gender gap in PhDs last year. So if you look at everybody in America who earned a PhD, the distribution is this. In engineering, it was about 75% men, and then down to business, about whatever that is, 55% men. So, all right, raise your hand if you see institutional sexism or systemic sexism here. Okay, no hands. Well, okay, couple hands. Okay, actually, people sort of signaling to me because you. All right. So at other schools I've been at, a lot of hands go up for this. And let's look at the other fields. So these are the other major fields. And in the other fields, women dominate, as they have since the 90s. Women, of course, earn women earn the majority of undergraduate degrees, master's degrees, and PhDs in this country. Women are doing very well in school. Men's performance is going down and down, especially the bottom half of the income distribution. So women dominate the academy at the level of degrees, and they are getting PhDs in different fields than men. Now, maybe this is systemic sexism, or maybe it reflects something that we know with, I think, a fair degree of confidence now, which is that prenatal testosterone, when it goes into the uterus or is generated, I'm sorry, we all start off as girls in utero, and then if there's a Y chromosome that triggers a cascade of events that lead to a little pulse of testosterone, which changes the genitalia to the male pattern and changes the brain to the male pattern. And as part of that transition from female to male, brains become less good at empathizing, reading emotion, being sensitive, and better at systemizing is the one. But what comes out is that boys are more interested in playing with things and girls more with people, and this goes on to occupational choices. So a major review in Psych Bull found a lot of evidence for this. I think you have to look at this graph and say, women are getting most of the PhDs, women are going into the sciences, but they're electing different sciences. And at what point do you say, until women are 50% of everything, it's sexism? Is that really a logical conclusion?
False cause.
When event A directly preceded event B, event A might be seen as the cause of event B. However, the correlation between event A and event B does not always imply causation. Sometimes, correlations are due to underlying causal effects. For example, tech companies tend to hire men more than women. Consequently, we can see that there are more men than women in tech companies. However, there are some underlying causal effects for this correlation. In other words, event A is not a fundamental cause of event B. Jonathan Haidt discussed this false cause in the following way.
That correlation does not imply causation. We know this so deeply that, we never let each other get away with it. If you're at a cocktail party and somebody who's not a social scientist says something, like we can't stop ourselves saying, well, but correlation doesn't imply causation. And if we're dreaming and someone in my dream, I correct them in my dreams, we all know this. So here's a graph. So autism, as autism has been going up since the 90s, so has organic food sales. What do you think? Do you think that autism is caused by organic food? Or do you think that it's autistic people who buy organic food and that's why they go up? Which is it? And if you're a social scientist, you say, probably neither. That's just a correlation. There's a lot of ways to explain that. Here's another one I just found from Googling. More buck for your bang. People who have more sex make the most money. So what do you think? Do you think that if you're currently in a relationship and you have more sex, your income will go up? Do you think that's the way it works? Of course not. There's a third variable. So a social scientist would instantly say, what's the third variable? The third variable is extroversion and openness to experience. People who have that trait have more sex and make more money. Okay, third, we know this. We all know this. But suddenly you present people with a disparity and they all say, oh my God, causation. The fact that that person is a woman is why she wasn't hired. So at Social Justice U, they teach you that if a group is underrepresented, it proves, or at least strongly suggests, that there is systemic or structural discrimination against that group. That is what you learn at SJU. Now, this is wrong. This is just flat out wrong. There's no defense of, I shouldn't say there's no defense. I'm sure someone will have a defense. But I believe this is wrong. At Truth University, we teach you that correlation does not imply causation. That is, we need to look for the third variable.
The blasphemy laws.
At a social justice university, there are many blasphemy laws. I just listed a few off the top of my head. Racism and sexism are endemic. Victims played no role in arriving at their current state. No difference of ability or interest. And affirmative action is good and more is better. So at most universities, if you disagree with any of these publicly, you can expect a very severe response. Now, why does this matter? There are lots of problems that we want to figure out. There are lots of things we want to think of. There are lots of racial inequalities. There are lots of gender inequalities. We need to understand what's going on, right? So a long-standing problem is that women are underrepresented on the faculty of STEM departments, science, technology, engineering. So what should we do? Well, at Harvard, back in 2004, I think it was, they had a conference on this. It was a closed-door conference, no public, no press, to really air ideas. They invited the president of the university, who's an economist, Lawrence Summers, and they asked him to give his thoughts. He's the president of a major university. Does he have any thoughts on why we can't get the numbers up in our STEM departments, the numbers of women? And so he gives a talk, and you can find it online. And, well, okay. Many people think that he said that women aren't as smart as men, and that's not at all what he said. In fact, I urge you to Google Lawrence Summers' Women in STEM. And if you read it, it's not that long. It is a model of careful social science thinking. Social sciences teach you to think about multiple forms of causality. It's hard to know what's what. And what he does is he comes in and he says, my guess is that there are many causes, and he lists three. One of them is discrimination.
Another is men are more drawn to the STEM field than women do. And the third reason is the following.
But he says, well, as one of them, one of the three causes could be that there is a difference in the standard deviation of IQ scores. He doesn't say that men are smarter, because they're not. The IQ is the same. But the spread is different, so that at 4 standard deviations above the mean, there are going to be more men. So this is statistically what he's talking about. The IQ scores for women in the United States, the same mean, but the standard deviation is larger for males. And so if we look 4 standard deviations above or below, there are more men. There are more men at the very top and the very bottom. There's a lot of research showing that this is the case on measures of quantitative skills.
As we can see in this figure, at the top ends of the distribution curves, there are more men than women. Tech companies want to hire these high IQ people.
But the point is that for recent history, for many decades, this has been true. That could be one of the 3 reasons. That's what he said. One of the 3. And that's what economists do. They draw graphs, they figure out things from curves. That's what they do. What happens? Do people argue back with him? That I don't know. Maybe somebody argued then. But the point is, there was such outrage, not just at Harvard, but around the country, that ultimately he was forced to resign.
When the president of Harvard University was forced to resign, Vivek Ramaswamy was a student of Harvard. He said,
I learned a valuable lesson from former Harvard president Larry Summers. I didn't learn it from him personally, but I picked it up as I watched his fall from grace while I was a student there, back in 2007. Harvard's motto is Veritas, the truth. But very little about what happened that year felt like the pursuit of truth. It was a shame to me that Larry Summers was punished for asking an important question that others ignored.
As discussed, at Social Justice University, or Social Care University, freedom of speech is considered to be blasphemy. On the other hand, at Truth University, there are no blasphemy laws.
From Thomas Jefferson, this institution will be based on the illimitable freedom of the human mind. For here we are not afraid to follow truth wherever it may lead, nor to tolerate any error, so long as reason is left free to combat it. And he's basically pointing to institutionalized disconfirmation.
Institutionalized disconfirmation is the following. When an academic environment contains the diversity of opinions and scholars are allowed to challenge each other's work freely, better thinking and better ideas tend to emerge. It is called institutionalized disconfirmation. It can eliminate confirmation bias.
That's the point of a university. No university can pursue both, and it has to be either truth or social justice. It can't be both.
Libertarians and systemizing.
As already discussed, libertarians are the highest on systemizing and the lowest on empathizing.
You guys, libertarians are the smartest, most logical, least emotional across all emotions, but just lower in compassion and just... So this explains the great strengths of libertarians and why they do so well in academics, why they do so well in think tanks. They're very theoretical, logical, rational people. We also have some logic problems. They solve them better than anyone else. So it's a strength, but it makes it harder. You know, empathizing means the ability to read the emotions and feelings of other people and anticipate what they're going to do. And I presented these results at the Cato Institute, and some people thought that, you know, they were very offended, but people said no, yeah, that's us. Yes, that's exactly what. Yeah, that's cool.
There are different kinds of libertarians.
Yes.
There are those so-called deontological, which really care about nothing except stay the hell out of my face. Mm-hmm. But there are many others, I think most of those that are associated with think tanks, like your friend Ron Bailey, who became libertarians only because they were very compassionate about human well-being. And Ron initially was a lefty, and he went to work for government to help do good for the world. And he was smart enough to figure out that that's not a very effective way of doing good for the world. But he's driven by compassion, and my anecdotal evidence is that many of my colleagues are as well.
Well, it's certainly true that libertarians look at social policy positions and they say, my God, the liberal view is causing so much damage, and here's a way to do it much better. And they're upset that bad policies are put into place by, quote, bleeding heart liberals, people so motivated by compassion that they can't look at the effects of their actions. As for whether Ron's true motive was compassion, that is, was he just going about his business and he just kept feeling such pain, such horrible internal pain when he saw others suffering, and my God, the liberals aren't helping. What else is there? Oh, libertarianism. If that's really the causal path, then I would grant that you're right. My guess, though, is that libertarians, because they are on average, again, this is a survey of averages, there's lots of variations, so your mileage may vary. But my sense is that they more come to see this intellectually, and then they realize, oh my God, these policies are actually much better at helping people.
Note.
In the Zeptiform theory, gender qualities are divided into the following three categories: minin, feminine, and masculine. Minin qualities are intellectuality, logicality, rationality, systemic thinking, etc. Feminine qualities are sensitivity, sensibility, geniality, sympathy, empathy, etc. Masculine qualities are vitality, physicality, wildness, strength, kinesthetic, etc. These qualities can be represented by systemizing, empathizing, and physicalizing. People have these gender qualities in different ratios. With that said, men tend to be high on minin qualities and masculine qualities. On the other hand, women tend to be high on feminine qualities. Details are discussed in the Zeptiform theory video series.
Part 1, Section 3, Woke Capitalism.
Libertarians tend to value reason, logic, or objective fact. However, some of them tend to value profit, or money, more than objective fact. That is, libertarians can be categorized into the following two groups. One is truth-driven libertarians, and the other is profit-driven libertarians. The latter, profit-driven libertarians, tend to utilize the ideology of social justice liberals in order to get money. It is called woke capitalism. Wokeness is related to the ideology of liberals, and capitalism is related to the ideology of libertarians. Then, the combination of wokeness and capitalism is described by Vivek Ramaswamy in the following way.
Basically, being woke means obsessing about race, gender, and sexual orientation. Maybe climate change too. Today, more and more people are becoming woke. And now, capitalism is trying to stay woke too. Once corporations discovered wokeness, the inevitable happened. They used it to make money.
Work capitalism works in the following way. Big corporations started to praise wokeness, such as gender diversity. Then, they criticize their own lack of wokeness. In exchange, they can get the protective shield of moral superiority of wokeness. They can protect themselves by embracing wokeness. Also, they can get more customers. That is, big corporations have figured out that They can make money by criticizing themselves. That is a cynical marriage between capitalism and wokeness. Here is one famous example. Ramaswamy said,
Let's start with Google's firing of software engineer James Damore. After he attended an internal meeting on Google's policies on diversity and inclusion, the organizers asked for feedback. He wrote a long memo titled Google's Ideological Echo Chamber and sent it to the organizers. Writing that memo would end up being a career-ending mistake.
Damore's memo includes a sensitive topic, gender differences. And that memo went virus. Consequently, he was fired. That is, the tech company needed to fire him in order to get the protective shield of political correctness. Then, Damore was interviewed by many people, such as Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, and Joe Rogan.
Now, the blowback from this has been very intriguing, as an outsider, looking at it. When I first heard about it, I thought, well, this mean, angry man must have written some things saying that women suck at tech or they suck at this, and people were reacting to this blatant misogynistic scribe that I was hearing about. When I read it, I was so confused because I was like, "Where's the mean stuff? Like, where is this?" And you also think the other thing that was really confusing was that some people were reprinting it without citations.
Right.
Did that freak you out? Like when you're being misrepresented?
Yeah, especially when people would say, "Oh, it was so unscientific because it didn't have citations."
Right.
And that was their entire argument.
Why the fuck would they do that without citations? It seems so unreasonable and so irresponsible.
I think a lot of these companies just have a certain narrative that they're trying to push.
Yeah.
And so like even, I've tried to talk to a lot of these reporters, and I'll give hour-long interviews with some of them, and at the end they'll just write the same sort of article of like, oh yeah, he's just a misogynist.
Yeah.
And so I think even if I can convince the individual journalist, they are under pressure by their boss to write a certain type of article.
God, what a weird world we're in right now. And another thing that I'm not hearing from anybody is how you wrote a whole page and a half describing all the different ways that women could be more involved in tech, or you can encourage more women into tech. Like, this is not the work of a misogynist. This is the work of someone who's carefully considering an issue and looking at it from a very, what I felt like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that you felt frustrated that you were looking at something that was, that people, the way they're approaching this was, they weren't looking at it for what it was. They had kind of decided how they were going to describe it and how they were going to deal with it. And it wasn't really based on facts or reality, and certainly not on science. And you sort of felt frustrated by this, and you decided to try to interject with as much of the current science as you could that could possibly explain choices.
Yeah.
Not why women are bad at it, not why they shouldn't be in it, which is what I kept reading, but more that why women choose to go into certain professions, what could be the impediment, and what we could do to maybe encourage more women to do it instead of doing this sort of blanket style diversity where you're just like, oh, we need 2 of these and we need 2 of those, which is what I seem to think that they were doing. Is that a good assessment?
Yeah.
By the way, this will never trend on YouTube. We might get 5 million hits. That's a real problem too. Like, there's a lot of censorship when it comes to these sort of conversations.
This is a Gulag t-shirt. It says, "Diversity of opinion will not be tolerated." The Gulag was a system of forced labor camps of the Soviet Union. Incidentally, James Damore said that, prior to writing his memo, he had read the works of Jonathan Haidt. That is, he was inspired by Jonathan Haidt to write that memo. As discussed, big corporations started to criticize themselves or their employees in order to protect their business. Also, they started to offer money to woke people. Woke people needed money in order to propagate their woke ideology. Furthermore, big corporations started to offer propagation tools to the woke people. Ramaswamy said,
Money was not the only dowry that corporations offered. What they really promised wokeness was a megaphone to turbocharge its message and make it mainstream. Circumstances forced wokeness and capitalism together, and they only stayed together so they could both gain money and power. But each secretly disdained the other. So corporations never truly loved wokeness, even as they embraced it and married it to capitalism. They always intended to use it. But wokeness never truly loved capitalism either. There was nothing fundamentally woke about capitalism. No natural compatibility. Each side accepted the proposal not because there was any truth to it, but because it was profitable. Wokeness and capitalism simply tolerate each other because each feels it can use the other. They will turn a blind eye to each other's faults as long as they themselves can still benefit. But a marriage in which each side secretly has contempt for the other cannot end well.
According to Ramaswamy, the marriage between wokeness and capitalism tends to destroy democracy. That is, it brings about authoritarianism or totalitarianism. Woke capitalism or woke corporations became the dictators of our society. However, on the global level, they can be seen as puppets. Ramaswamy said,
"On the global stage, the corporations themselves become puppets too. So who's pulling their strings?"
The answer is the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP found out that they can manipulate American woke companies in order to rule the world. China has the world's second largest consumer market. Therefore, as a condition for multinational corporations to do business in China, these corporations need to obey what the CCP demands. For example, when Daryl Morey, who was the general manager of the Houston Rockets, supported the freedom of Hong Kong, the CCP was incensed. All Chinese broadcasters refused to show any NBA games. Nike pulled all its Rockets gear from its stores in China, and Morey was fired. The CCP would never allow multinational corporations to support Hong Kong, Taiwan, Tibet, or the Uyghurs. Here is another example. The Ancient One who is in the movie, Doctor Strange, was originally a Tibetan monk, but the CCP thinks that Tibet is part of China. Therefore, Disney made the Tibetan monk white. Because of this, woke people criticized Disney for whitewashing. In this way, Disney was able to shift people's attention from the Tibetan issue in China to the racial issue in America. Also, woke activists were easily appeased because Disney made the Ancient One a woman instead of a man. White woman washing was good for feminists and also for the CCP. It was good for everyone but Tibet. Ramaswamy heard this story from the screenwriter of Doctor Strange. As we can see, the CCP can easily control the ethical opinions of multinational corporations. In addition to this, as a condition for these multinational corporations to do business in China, the CCP can demand access to the private data of consumers of these corporations. Ramaswamy said,
"The CCP is turning multinational corporations into Trojan horses to achieve their longer-run geopolitical objectives."
Details are discussed in his book, The Woke Inc. Inside Corporate America's Social Justice Scam.
Part 1, Section 4, Uniting the World.
As already discussed, liberals tend to prioritize empathizing more than systemizing. Empathy is the ability to see the world from the perspective of the other person. However, according to Jonathan Haidt, liberals are not good at seeing the world from the perspective of conservatives. He said,
We tested how well liberals and conservatives could understand each other. We asked more than 2,000 American visitors to fill out the Moral Foundation's questionnaire. 1/3 of the time, they were asked to fill it out normally, answering as themselves. 1/3 of the time, they were asked to fill it out as they think a typical liberal would respond. 1/3 of the time, they were asked to fill it out as a typical conservative would respond. The results were clear and consistent. Moderates and conservatives were most accurate in their predictions. Liberals were the least accurate, especially those who described themselves as very liberal.
As we can see, although liberals want to be empathetic, they are not always good at it. In other words, in some cases, motivations and abilities can be inversely proportional. Liberals want to be empathetic toward the weak. Consequently, they try to silence the opinions of conservatives in order to protect the weak. In this way, they are not able to understand the moral values of conservatives. Jonathan Haidt was liberal, but, unlike other liberals, he tried to see the world from the perspective of conservatives. He went to India because the culture in India appreciates conservative moral values. He tried to blend into their culture. Then, he realized that the morality of their culture has valuable aspects. Since then, he considers himself a centrist. He has been trying to integrate the moral values of liberals and conservatives.
And I'd already been to India by that. And that's what allowed me, finally, to understand conservatives. And it was only when I'd gone to India and really tried to understand a traditional religious, it was only then that I was able to sort of get inside their minds and their moral system and see that there were alternative moral worlds.
Incidentally, Vivek Ramaswamy is an Indian American, and he is Hindu.
Being a Hindu, can you please share your faith about God and what you think of his son, Jesus Christ?
Thank you. So I appreciate that. So I'll share with you my faith, and I'll share with you the relevance that I think it has to leading this country. So I'm a Hindu. There's many strains like there are Christianity, Catholicism, etc. There's many strains of Hinduism too. I believe in one true God. I believe that that God resides in each of us. I think it is the same statement of spirit when we say in the Christian tradition, and I did go to Catholic schools and I've read the Bible perhaps more closely than most Christians I know. It's the same message as when we say we are equal because we are made in the image of God. It's the same spirit to say that's where our equality comes from. It's not some secular value. We're equal in the eyes of each other because we're equal in the eyes of God. The tradition I was raised in, we say we're equal in the eyes of each other because God resides in each of us. That we each have a duty to one another. You got to think about that strand of sacrifice and duty. That's foundational to Hinduism. I think it's the common strand between the Old Testament and the New. I mean, God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac for God. He didn't make him follow through with it. The New Testament, God comes back and says, I will sacrifice my son, Jesus Christ, for you, the people. And so that's a long way of saying that I'm not Christian. And just in my spirit of my answer to the last question, I will never pretend to be something I'm not. I'm always going to speak the truth about who I am and what I stand for. But I think it's deeply true that we share the same Judeo-Christian values that this nation was founded on. And this nation was absolutely founded on Judeo-Christian values. That's a fact. It is also a fact that I deeply share those values in common. And to be honest, does our church, does our family, when there isn't a Hindu temple available, will we go for our collection of self to a church if that's the next closest available opportunity for prayer? Yes, we will. And so in our tradition, we say Jesus Christ is a son of God. I understand that's different than saying he's the son of God, but we share the same value set in common. And I'm not running to be pastor-in-chief. I'm running to be commander-in-chief. It's a different role, right? And for that role, I think we share the same value set. Thank you.
I'm very impressed with you because I think you act more like a Christian than most Christians.
I agree. Thank you for saying that. We have the same values, and that's why. Thank you very much.
Ramaswamy said, "We are equal because we are made in the image of God." However, India has the caste system. A caste is a fixed social group, and multiple castes create hierarchical levels. Within the hierarchical system, individuals are expected to marry within the same caste. Therefore, there is no mobility in this system. On the other hand, capitalism can bring about mobility. Related to this, Ramaswamy said,
Seeing how much this system, the caste system, revolved around honor and status, helped me understand how much the American system, capitalism, revolved around wealth. While my father always taught me to never over-prioritize the pursuit of wealth over virtue, it seemed to me that the pursuit of wealth equally by all was still preferable to a system of honor based on birth. That's when I began to fall in love with capitalism.
Capitalism, which is related to economic liberty, is strongly valued by libertarians. That is why Ramaswamy became a libertarian. As discussed previously, libertarians can be divided into the following two categories. One is profit-driven libertarians, and the other one is truth-driven libertarians. Profit-driven libertarians tend to use the wokeness of liberals in order to get money, as already discussed. On the other hand, truth-driven libertarians tend to be connected to the conscientiousness of conservatives. Vivek Ramaswamy can be seen as the latter. That is, he is a truth-driven libertarian, and he embraced the moral foundations of conservatives.
You know, in my college days, I certainly was libertarian before I became conservative. I still have pretty deeply rooted libertarian instincts, but I'm definitely a conservative today.
What was it that turned you from libertarian into conservative?
I realized that I cared more. I cared about more issues than the narrow set of issues that libertarians care about, right? So there's more to me than the first step for me was there's more to me than the libertarian in me. Libertarianism is all about the relationship between the state and the individual.
Libertarians tend to value the freedom of each individual person. Therefore, they do not appreciate the authority of the government.
Okay, and that's really important. But there are still the deeper questions of what do we do in that now free world, that world that's free of state intervention? What then? And I think those are really important questions that relate to discovering who am I? Who is my family? What does that mean to me? What is true? What is God? Am I part of something bigger than myself? How does that relate to the culture that I create, both as a father, as an individual, and yes, even as a citizen? And I think those are important questions for a well-flourishing society that go beyond just the relationship between the government and the individual. And I care deeply about those questions. And so that's what led me to say, okay, I'm more than just a libertarian.
He said, he is more than just a libertarian. In other words, from the perspective of libertarianism, he integrated the perspective of conservatism. Also, he is open to listening to the opinions of liberals.
I was just wondering, what were your opinions on the LGBTQ plus community?
Well, I don't think it's one community.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, how could it be? Just mashed together an alphabet soup. Trans is fundamentally in tension with gay, if you ask me. But what's your opinion?
I'm personally pansexual, so I was
Okay.
just wondering what your views on same-sex couples were.
I don't have a negative view of same-sex couples, but I do have a negative view of a tyranny of the minority. So I think that in the name of protecting against the tyranny of the majority, and there are times in this country's history where we have had a tyranny of the majority, we have now, in the name of protecting against tyranny of the majority, created a new tyranny of the minority. And I think that that's wrong. I don't think that somebody who's religious should be forced to officiate a wedding that they disagree with. I don't think somebody who is a woman who's worked really hard for her achievements should be forced to compete against a biological man in a swim competition. I don't think that somebody who's a woman that respects her bodily autonomy and dignity should be forced to change clothes in a locker room with a man. That's not freedom, that's oppression. And so I believe that we live in a country where free adults should be free to dress how they want, behave how they want, and that's fine. But you don't become oppressive by foisting that on others. And that especially includes kids, because kids aren't the same as adults. And so I think adults are free to make whatever choices they want, but do not foist that ideology onto children before children are in a position as adults to make decisions for themselves. And so I think a lot of the frustration in the country, and if I'm being really honest, that I also share, comes from that new culture of oppression where saying those things can actually get somebody punished. And in my case, it's part of why it's my responsibility to say them. And I respect that you may have a different opinion, and that's okay. Part of what makes our country great is that you and I can be civil and have this conversation, and that we live in a country that still gives us, each of us, the right to speak to a presidential candidate and back, and still say that we pledge allegiance to the same nation. So I think that's the beauty of our country, and that's my honest opinion.
Awesome. Well,
Thanks.
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your civility as well. I appreciate it.
Cosmetic surgeries, the gender transition today. We're done teaching our troops. Protect our women. Amen. Protect our You can say something to me. It's okay. Come back. Come on back. It's okay.
Just like you answer, Mom.
Come on up. It's okay. You can ask me a question, and then I will answer. Do you want to ask me a question?
Yes.
You can do that.
If somebody non-consents to me, I'm not having their child. This is my choice. It's my body. I'm already raising a kid that somebody implanted in me and doesn't take care of. The system does nothing for the single mother. There's no child support and nobody goes after them. I've been raising a child by myself for 8 years. My name is Kayla Crest.
And are you a mother?
I am a mother.
Okay, thank you.
And my kid is successful, and I don't want to be frowned upon. I don't want to be put down because I'm a single mother. My kid is healthy, happy, and successful.
Thank you, Kayla. And I want to say you're doing one of the most important things is a mother raising more children in this world. Even if we have our disagreements, I want to say thank you for that. So thank you. And part of what it means to live in this country is we have free speech. We get to speak our minds openly, even if we all don't agree on it. So let's actually applaud her for the courage. Come into a room and ask any question, even though we don't agree on it.
So I'm here with Kayla Christ. She just came and interrupted the Vivek Ramaswamy town hall. What made you feel so strongly to speak up and come in?
I have very many gay, straight, bisexual, transgender allies all across the world. And I hate to hear somebody say there is just man and women when I know there are people born with both parts. They're born different ways. Say I was born a woman and I feel like a man internally. I'm a woman and I feel like a man internally. There are people born with both parts. And if they want to, have the surgeries to be whatever they want to be, choose which one, there are more than one gender. People are born transgender.
Freedom of speech is one of the essential tenets of libertarianism. Related to this, Ramaswamy said,
A good barometer for the health of any democracy is the percentage of people who are willing to say what they actually believe in public.
However, the ideology of liberal social justice warriors has been used to silence the voices of many people. Ramaswamy said,
More speech, not censorship.
Freedom of speech is needed for finding truth, and Vivek Ramaswamy's presidential campaign slogan is, Truth. Telling the truth brings about trust. On the other hand, hiding the truth brings about distrust. People cannot be united by distrust, but trust. Telling the truth not only brings about trust, but also justice. Jonathan Haidt said,
Only if you commit to truth, I believe, can you actually achieve justice. Thank you.
With your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you know what? You are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That is the American dream. Thank you all. God bless you. God bless our United States of America. Thank you.
This is the end of Part 1 of Metapolitics. In Part 2, we will focus on the revolutionary processes of politics in the near future.